Putin's going to have to decide, or if he hasn't already, Putin will have to decide how loyal or disloyal or complicit or not complicit Surovikin actually is. And I think it's too soon to tell if Putin is going to just, permanently either imprison or whatever everybody who was affiliated with Prigozhin, or if he will allow any of them to um, be rehabilitated in some way.
Mr. Kagan, from your perspective, was the crash an assassination or an accident, or should we not be speculating?
It was absolutely a hit. I don't think that there's any likelihood that this was anything other than Putin choosing a very public way of executing Prigozhin.
There's been a lot of thoughts on this, and one of them was that if the crash was planned, maybe it wasn't Putin, that it was someone part of the elite, but you think it was absolutely Putin.
I think that everyone in the elite understood that Prigozhin was alive at Putin's sufferance. And I don't think that anyone in the elite would have been courageous enough to kill Prigozhin without Putin's permission, um, and to take responsibility for usurping Putin's prerogatives. I think these discussions miss some of the Putin context here, which I think is very important, which I'd like to talk about a little bit if that's okay. Putin lives in a world where two things are very important. One is appearing strong, and the other is loyalty. Putin has a saying that he repeats: weakness is lethal, because he grew up in a very tough environment in the Soviet Union. He prizes his strength, and he thinks that when you are a leader and you show weakness, that's when you get killed. Prigozhin had humiliated him publicly worse than anyone in his circle has ever humiliated him. Not just with the mutiny, but then with the way that the mutiny was resolved, with the Belarusian dictator Lukashenko taking credit and really counting coup on Putin for having resolved it. It was a humiliation of an unbearable proportion for someone who sees such things as potentially existential threats to his survival, let alone his regime. No one would have usurped his ability to avenge himself on Prigozhin, which he clearly felt it necessary to do. And in this sort of gang rules logic of his, it was vital for him at some point to demonstrate that no one can humiliate him in this way without receiving this kind of vengeance from him. So I think when you think about this from the perspective of Putin and the Kremlin, there is only one explanation for what happened.
So the humiliation, that was there's a psychological component, it sounds like, to ridding himself, meaning Putin ridding himself of Prigozhin. So it sounds Prigozhin was positioning himself as a hero. Do you think that Putin saw that as a threat to himself?
So I don't think that Putin. So first of all, I don't think that Prigozhin was trying to replace Putin. I don't think that even the armed rebellion. I don't think that the intent of that was a coup, or to establish Prigozhin in charge of the Kremlin. Um, and in fact, as my colleagues at the Institute for the Study of War will be writing in our update later today, the epitaph that Putin has offered Prigozhin um, emphasizes Prigozhin's personal loyalty to Putin. And I think that Putin didn't think that Prigozhin had turned on him. What Prigozhin was trying to do with the armed rebellion was to force Putin's hand and forced Putin to fire the Russian defense minister Sergei Shoigu and the Russian chief of the general staff Valery Gerasimov, with whom Prigozhin was at feud. But he wasn't trying to topple Putin. He wasn't trying to take over. And I think Putin understood that. So the problem was less, I think, that he saw Prigozhin as a threat to his personal rule, and more that, on the one hand, Prigozhin had gotten out of control and was causing problems, which is why Putin began disempowering him. But then Prigozhin took this action that humiliated Putin in front of the elite and showed him to be powerless in his own country, which is unacceptable. And so at that point, I think Putin decided that he needed to cancel Prigozhin in a very public way.
I'm just wondering if he did keep quiet and if he denied his connection, then would he, because it's out there that this might just be this engineered situation, a plot, and Prigozhin is now off quietly away somewhere.
Look, we can. It's the nature of things like this in regimes like this that you can spin whatever fantasies you like, which make great spy novels. Um, and I can't sit here and tell you for sure that, I haven't seen Prigozhin's body and I haven't tested his DNA, so I can't tell you for sure that he was in the crash. But there is a very straightforward explanation for what happened based on known and observable facts, and then based on the reactions of a lot of people involved in all of this, that points to one conclusion, which is that he's dead and that Putin killed him. That's, again, I mean, we can all, there's always going to be enough. There will never be enough evidence publicly available, incontrovertible, that we can disprove a priori any conspiracy theory you like. But I am very confident in this assessment.
Do you think his body will be found?
If it hasn't already been, then probably not. But even if it were, what what would that tell us? It's not like some team of international inspectors is going to be allowed in to verify that it actually was Prigozhin. There's no, if we want to believe in conspiracy theories, if you want to believe that there's some sort of conspiracy theory here, then Putin has to be the mastermind behind it. Because too many agencies of the Russian government that report to Putin and not Prigozhin are involved in all of this. So if you want to believe in a conspiracy theory, then Putin has to be behind it. If Putin is in fact behind some crazy conspiracy theory to help Prigozhin out, first of all, that would be absolutely bizarre given what Prigozhin has done and how Putin has been reacting. But second of all, then you're never going to prove that it's not true. So I just, my question in return is, what is the value of chasing these extraordinarily unlikely theories? Why is that of interest?
I guess it's because the facts aren't confirmed, so there's all these things that, what if it's this? What if it's that?
Yeah. No, I understand, but I think look. There are enough facts that are well enough confirmed that you you can accept the straightforward explanation that emerges from all of that, or you can construct various theories. But there are not contravening facts. First of all, there are no facts that I'm aware of that run against the straightforward interpretation of what happened. So fundamentally, what we're doing is having a discussion about, well, the facts don't exclude this or that possibility, which is true, but there are no facts to support that, and there are a mountain of facts to support the other. So I think, we should accept the straightforward answer until and unless something clear emerges.
Do you think Prigozhin is dead?
Yes,
If
yes.
confirmed, if because of the failed mutiny 2 months ago, is that the reason for
Oh,
all of
yes,
this?
absolutely, absolutely. Look, the fact that Putin basically gave an epitaph for Prigozhin means to me he's dead. the way the Wagner affiliated Telegram channels, the guys who talk about Wagner are talking about it, he's dead. I think the odds that he's not dead approach zero. So he's dead. He's dead because of the mutiny. Yes, that was the line that he crossed. That moved him, in Putin's view, I think, from someone to be chastened and handled, which is where I think Putin was at before the mutiny, to somebody who ultimately needed to be executed. So yeah.
Speaking of that mutiny, um, Sergei Surovikin has been taken off his post as head of the Air Force. Is what do you think about that? Is that because he he was complicit in the mutiny? What is the reason behind it?
So Surovikin had been close to Prigozhin, and had been someone that Prigozhin had actually named as an ally in the Russian military for a long time. So he was known to be associated with Prigozhin for a long time. And Surovikin was already suffering from that association before the mutiny, in some respects, um, as Prigozhin's star began to wane in the Kremlin. When the mutiny occurred, Surovikin uh, rushed to condemn it and to try to distance himself from it in every possible way. But it's very clear that Putin wasn't interested in that, and that Putin ordered a purge of the Russian military of people who were thought to be loyal to or affiliated with Prigozhin, regardless of what they did during the mutiny. And at that point, Surovikin was clearly arrested and has been disappeared somewhere. And what we had yesterday, and this, if we need more data to suggest that this was indeed a deliberate Kremlin hit, the only thing that happened yesterday vis-a-vis Surovikin was that the Kremlin finally formally announced his replacement as head of the Russian aerospace forces. We've known that he wasn't running the Russian aerospace forces for a long time because he'd clearly been disappeared following the mutiny. But his status had remained uncertain. So if we want to believe that this was something other than an assassination of Prigozhin, we also have to believe that purely by coincidence, on the same day that that accident occurred, was the day that the Kremlin decided to announce the replacement for somebody who has clearly not been performing his duties for a long time. It looks like a pattern. And it looks like a pattern, frankly, that you could see in the movie The Godfather, of the angered uh, mafia boss cleaning up on one day the loose ends from those that he felt had betrayed him in some way.
Is this firing the first step? Do you think we're going to see his name in the news again?
Surovikin, it's hard to tell. Putin's going to have to decide, or if he hasn't already, Putin will have to decide how loyal or disloyal or complicit or not complicit Surovikin actually is. And I think it's too soon to tell if Putin is going to just, permanently either imprison or whatever everybody who was affiliated with Prigozhin, or if he will allow any of them to um, be rehabilitated in some way. Um, I don't think that we're going to see Surovikin back in any leadership position in the Russian military, and certainly not as long as the current Russian military leadership is still there. Because whatever Surovikin did to Putin, he clearly challenged Shoigu and Gerasimov. And one of the things that Putin is currently demonstrating is that he is standing with Shoigu and Gerasimov. So I don't see those guys desiring to have Surovikin around, and I don't see Putin forcing them to. So I wouldn't bet a ruble one way or the other on whether we're going to ever see Surovikin again, but I would be surprised if we see him in any senior command position anytime soon.
How powerful was Wagner last week, and how powerful is the group now?
So the group has just been decapitated, and it's not clear in what form it will continue to exist because this assassination didn't just kill Prigozhin, it also killed the Wagner Group founder, Dmitry Utkin, and another senior Wagner leader as well, which is, again, one of the other reasons why I am so confident that it was deliberate. There are lots of ways of killing Prigozhin. It seems that it's not that easy to find Prigozhin and Utkin together in a way where you can take them both down at the same time. And this was an opportunity, and somebody took it, presumably Putin. So Wagner has just been decapitated. It's not clear to me that Wagner will continue to exist or in what form. But that's less of a dramatic change than it might have seemed, because Putin had already been in the process of destroying and dismantling Wagner since the rebellion. And this is one of the reasons why I and my colleagues think that it took Putin 2 months to kill Prigozhin. Um, Prigozhin was extremely popular with Wagner. Many Wagner commanders and fighters, we think, were loyal to Prigozhin first and foremost, and only secondarily to Russia or Putin or anybody else. And therefore, we think Putin had a problem after the armed rebellion. He wanted to separate Prigozhin from Wagner because these Wagner guys are good fighters, and Putin needs them. And he also doesn't want to turn them against him. So we've seen Putin spend the intervening 2 months splitting up Wagner, weakening it, starving it, cutting off its financial resources, dividing it, trying to recruit its commanders, having some success, and also running Prigozhin down and running a campaign to smear Prigozhin and tarnish his reputation with the Wagner fighters. And so one of our sort of hypotheses about the timing is that Putin may have decided that he'd finally gotten to the point where Wagner itself was sufficiently weak, and that Prigozhin's image was sufficiently tarnished that he could afford to exact the vengeance that he had probably decided he was going to exact during the mutiny. That's a long answer to say that Wagner was not strong yesterday or the day before, and it's weaker today, and its future is completely unclear at this point.
It was written in the Times that Poland's prime minister warned that mercenaries would also pose a greater threat to other countries under Putin's leadership rather than Prigozhin. So that's a hypothesis that it's perhaps Wagner would gain strength. What do you think?
Anything is possible. It seems to me unlikely. The Russian Ministry of Defense, which seems to be taking on the portfolio that Wagner had been filling in Africa and elsewhere, the Russian Ministry of Defense has shown itself in general terms to be significantly less competent and effective than Wagner most of the time. So I'm not sure that I would assess that that's going to change here suddenly. And Prigozhin had managed to attract to himself a group of extraordinarily talented thugs and war criminals, and mold them into a sort of an extremely evil elite organization. It's not easy to replicate that. And again, this is not something that the Russian Ministry of Defense has shown any particular skill at doing. So, looking at it as an organization, it's possible, but I would be surprised. Now, if we look at it a different way and we consider the risk that Wagner mercenaries who had been loyal to Prigozhin and fully controlled by Prigozhin might slip their leashes and start freelancing in ways that are worrisome, that's a possibility. But I think it's hard to say. I don't see a whole lot of basis for thinking that they're going to become more dangerous now. But it's too soon to tell because we're going to have to see what actually happens with the group and with the individuals involved, and it's just too soon to know.
Now, Mr. Kagan, do you think that the special operation in Crimea Did that have anything to do with the plane crash revenge?
The Ukrainian raid in Crimea.
Yes.
No, I don't think that had anything to do with it at all. I think the Ukrainian, look, the Ukrainians have been conducting various raids on the east bank of the Dnipro River and on reportedly on the little spit of land that is south of the Dnipro River Delta. This is another raid. I don't see any reason why this should be associated with Wagner, and lots of reasons why it shouldn't be, by the way, because a raid like that is not something you decide to do on a whim. And I would think that it would have taken more time to organize than was available between when the crash happened and when the raid happened.
So it was pre planned.
I would assume so, yeah. Things like that are not, again, you don't usually just decide, hey, everybody, let's get in a bunch of boats and go do a raid. That doesn't usually end well.
It's interesting because I've been reading this, researching all of this, and there are so many perspectives, and that's one of them.
Look, I mean, I understand there's a natural, desire when you see a bunch of anomalous events to want to string them all together. But it's also important to keep in mind that this is a war involving many hundreds of thousands of people across a 1,000-kilometer long line. Lots of things happen every day. Some of them are newsworthy, some of them are not. Um, this happened to be a newsworthy event. The Ukrainians chose to publicize a particular raid, um, but it's not. There's just what would be. I don't know what the theory would be about even what the connection would be. I'm pretty sure the Ukrainians didn't take down Prigozhin's plane. That's not what happened. Um, so I just don't see what the connection would be.
The goals, it says, were met and achieved, and casualties inflicted on the enemy. Now, they didn't specify what the goals were, the Ukrainian forces. What do you think the goals were?
So I don't really speculate about what the Ukrainians are trying to do. That's part of our policy, respecting the Ukrainians' own request for operational silence, um, because we don't want to help tip their hands for what they're going to do. Um, so I'm not going to speculate on that. There are lots of good reasons why the Ukrainians would want to demonstrate to the Russians that the Russians need to be concerned about their rear area security. Um, and there are lots of things on Crimea that I could imagine the Ukrainians would want to destroy. Um, there are tons of reasons why I could imagine them wanting to do this. I have no idea which one in particular they were pursuing.
I want to briefly mention the F 16 jets. Norway is now going to be donating them to Ukraine, and this move is going in along with Denmark and the Netherlands. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think it's going to change anything crucially?
Well, certainly when the Ukrainians have incorporated all of the promised F-16s into their air force and are able to operate them, it will change things significantly because the Ukrainians are starved for air power, which means that on the one hand they're not able to challenge Russian aircraft as they would like to, but on the other hand they can't use air power against Russian ground forces because you need air power to do that. So it's been clear for many, 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 many months that the Ukrainians were going to need Western airframes if they were going to continue to have an operational air force. Um, this is, again, this is apparent because Ukraine has been flying Soviet equipment. So the principal source of Soviet equipment is Russia. I'm reasonably confident that the Russians are not going to be restocking the Ukrainian Air Force anytime soon. So, as the Ukrainians were losing aircraft through 2022, it became apparent that they were going to need Western planes. It's baffling to me that the West has waited as long as it has to provide some capability that is so clearly important in modern warfare, and the Ukrainians were going to need. That said, I think the Ukrainians are saying that they don't expect to see F-16s until next year, actually operational. So it's whatever's going on is not going to be relevant for this particular counteroffensive effort. But yes, it will be a very big deal when the Ukrainians are able to operate F-16s, and especially when they can operate all of the F-16s that have been promised. That'll be a significant increase in their capabilities.
Mr. Kagan, thank you. Frederick Kagan is a military analyst and director of the Critical Threats Project at the American Enterprise Institute, and he supervises the team that is covering the Russia-Ukraine war. To read more on the analysis of Wagner and the Russian-Ukraine war, visit times.radio/subscribe.